Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take a whole stack of information and really pull out the key insights for you. Today we're digging into temperament, specifically introversion and extroversion. We're drawing a lot from the book Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking.
That's right. And our goal today really is to unpack why our society seems to value extroverted traits so much. What are we missing by maybe overlooking the power of quiet? We'll look at the history of this extrovert ideal, challenge some common ideas about introverts, and show how valuing different styles can lead to, well, surprising success, leadership, creativity, even just our personal lives.
Yeah, there's a lot here, and I think you'll find some genuinely surprising things, maybe some aha moments that shift how you see yourself or others. Okay, let's jump in. Maybe we can start with a story. Montgomery, Alabama, December 1st, 1955. Rosa Parks. We often picture her as, really bold, outspoken, easily standing up to everyone on that bus.
Right, that's the common image.
But apparently, her obituaries described her very differently. Soft-spoken, sweet, even timid and shy. Yet, they also said she had the courage of a lion and this quiet fortitude. Which makes you pause, doesn't it? How can you be shy and courageous?
And that question itself is really telling, isn't it? Why do we even ask that? It points straight to what the source material calls the extrovert ideal. This idea where introversion, maybe sensitivity, seriousness, shyness, they've sort of become, well, second-class personality traits.
Second class, how so?
Well, research backs this up pretty consistently. Talkative people, they often get rated as smarter, more interesting, more desirable, even when, get this, there's zero correlation between the gift of gab and good ideas. It's a powerful bias.
Wow, zero correlation. So where did this bias come from? It wasn't always like this, was it?
No, definitely not. The material traces this fascinating shift from what it calls a culture of character to a culture of personality.
Okay, culture of character.
Yeah.
What did that look like?
Think 19th century. Advice manuals then, they celebrated things like inner virtue, nobility, modesty, self-sacrifice, even anonymity. There's an example of a timid shop girl giving away her small earnings anonymously. That was the ideal. Focus on the inner self.
Right, inner virtue.
But then, early 20th century, big shift. The focus moves outward. It becomes about personality, about how you project yourself.
Ah, so like Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, that sort of thing.
Exactly. He built an empire helping people, mostly businessmen, root out insecurities, focus on public speaking, influencing others. It was all about performance. And advertising jumped right on board, too. Suddenly, consumers were performers needing rescue from, quote, the hostile glare of the public spotlight. Ads screaming things like, all around you, people are judging you silently.
Goodness, that sounds intense, like you constantly have to be on.
Precisely. And psychology, interestingly, started reflecting this too. Back in the 1920s, psychologists like Gordon Allport were developing tests for social dominance. Allport himself noted, he said, our current civilization seems to place a premium upon the aggressive person, the go-getter.
Even Carl Jung, who gave us the terms introvert and extrovert.
Right. Even Jung saw this happening. He noted the newly precarious status of introversion.
Yeah.
And this was despite him seeing introverts as vital, as educators and promoters of culture, people who show the value of the interior life.
And then there's this other idea, maybe even more provocative, that extroversion could be like in our DNA.
Yeah, some psychologists suggest that. They point to how extroversion seems less common in Asia and Africa compared to Europe and America. The theory goes maybe early world travelers, the ones who ventured out, were naturally more extroverted and, well, passed those traits on.
So it might be cultural and have deeper roots?
It suggests these preferences aren't just fleeting trends. And the pressure is still very real today. You see rising rates of self-reported shyness, social anxiety disorder affecting nearly 1 in 5 Americans now, and the whole self-help industry, think Tony Robbins, it often doubles down on this ideal. You don't just need to feel great, you need to radiate waves of energy, know how to sell yourself.
Sometimes at the cost of being authentic, maybe.
That's the potential downside, yes.
Okay, so we've established this extrovert ideal. But let's clarify what introversion actually is, because it seems so misunderstood. What isn't it?
Crucial point. The source is really clear. Introvert does not mean hermit or misanthrope. Absolutely not. Many introverts are perfectly friendly people. E.M. Forster, the author, definitely introverted. His famous line was, only connect.
Right, so it's not about disliking people. What about shyness, then? Are they the same thing?
Good question. No, they're distinct. Shyness is about the fear of social disapproval or humiliation. It's inherently painful. Introversion, though, is more of a preference for quieter, less stimulating environments. It's not inherently painful. It's about managing energy.
So you could be shy but still an extrovert.
Absolutely. Think Barbra Streisand, huge star, but famously had terrible stage fright. That's a shy extrovert. Or you can be a non-shy introvert, like Bill Gates. Keeps to himself, generally, but doesn't seem bothered by what others think. Not shy, just introverted.
That makes sense. And then there's this other term you mentioned, highly sensitive people. Is that related?
It often is, yeah. And it's actually a technical term in psychology, not just, a general description. Someone highly sensitive might feel really overwhelmed, maybe pleasantly, by music like Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, or they might feel sickened more quickly by violence on screen.
Okay. And how does that link to introversion?
Well, the research suggests about 70% of highly sensitive people are also introverts. There's a significant overlap.
And this connects back to biology, you said.
Yes, fascinatingly so. They talk about skin conductance tests. High reactive introverts, they literally sweat more when exposed to new stimuli. Their nervous systems are just more reactive. Low reactive extroverts, they sweat less. Their skin is, in a way, cooler.
Wait, so that's where the phrase socially cool comes from. Literally cooler skin.
Kind of amazing, right? It seems to stem from that lower physiological reactivity. And conversely, think about blushing. A lot of high reactives hate it because it feels uncontrollable.
Yeah, totally embarrassing.
But biologically, it's actually seen as socially useful. It's an authentic signal of embarrassment, showing humility, maybe a desire to make amends. It actually tends to draw people together. This all ties back to the work of Dr. Jerome Kagan, mentioned in the sources. He identified high reactivity as a key biological basis for introversion. Our bodies really do shape our experiences.
Wow. Okay, so if this extrovert ideal is so pervasive and introversion has these biological roots, how does this ideal actually shape our institutions, like day-to-day life?
Oh, profoundly. Let's take education. Think about modern classrooms.
Lots of group work, right? Desks in pods or circles.
Exactly. Designed for constant interaction. And the research, it shows the vast majority of teachers believe that the ideal student is an extrovert, someone who speaks up readily.
So the quieter kids might get overlooked, or even seen as less engaged.
That's the risk. And it doesn't stop after school. Look at somewhere like Harvard Business School, which the source uses as an example. They have learning teams, professors deliberately trying to draw out reticent students. There are tips on being a good class participator.
Sounds like pressure.
Intense pressure,
Yeah.
and huge emphasis on group social events, like happy hours, which for an introvert can just be incredibly draining, not restorative.
And then you get into the workplace.
Same pattern. The material quotes an Atlanta corporate trainer saying, basically, here everyone knows that it's important to be an extrovert and troublesome to be an introvert. It's almost like putting on a uniform. People work hard at looking like extroverts, fitting that mold, whether it feels natural or not.
How much energy gets wasted just keeping up that appearance, I wonder?
That's a really good question. And it can even extend to places like religious institutions. The source gives an example of Saddleback Church. Admired for its mission, sure, but practices like mandatory smile and good morning or expecting very outward enthusiasm.
That could be tough for someone quieter.
It can be. It creates this very extroverted atmosphere to the point where introverts might even start questioning their own faith experience just because their natural way of expressing it is less, well, loud.
It really shows how deep this ideal runs. But, okay, here's the turn, right? Despite all this pressure, introverts obviously contribute hugely. Let's talk about the hidden strengths. Creativity, for instance.
Absolutely. This is where it gets really interesting. Think about Albert Einstein's quote. He said something like, "I am a horse for a single harness, not cut out for teamwork."
It is imperative that one person do the thinking and the commanding. Yeah, pretty clear stance.
Exactly. And this leads into what the source calls the new groupthink, this modern obsession with teams. Most managers believe teams are the key to success. But the evidence? Well, it tells a more nuanced story.
Okay, so what does the evidence say?
Well, first, solitude is incredibly powerful for creativity. Remember Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple?
Yeah, the tech genius behind the first Apple computers.
Right, he was apparently quite shy. Went to the first meeting of the Homebrew Computer Club, got inspired, but then he went home alone and sketched out the design for the Apple I. That deep work happened in solitude. Other studies show the same. For chess grandmasters, the biggest predictor of skill. Serious study alone. College students. Learn more studying alone.
Interesting. So collaboration isn't always the answer.
Not necessarily for the initial deep thinking or skill building phase. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, known for his work on flow, studied highly creative people. He found many were kind of on the social margins as teenagers. They cultivated their talents alone. Think Charles Darwin, Madeline L'Engle.
And what about brainstorming? That's like the ultimate group activity, isn't it?
We think it is, but the research is surprisingly critical. There was a famous study, the coding war games, with programmers. They got much better results when they worked separately, without even communicating during the task.
Why would that be?
Well, partly, the fear of public humiliation is a potent force in groups. People hold back ideas. And other studies show people actually perform worse on puzzles when there's an audience. It contradicts the whole group geniuses idea.
So solitude for creativity. What about leadership? Isn't leadership all about being outgoing, charismatic?
That's the stereotype, definitely fueled by places like Harvard Business School. But the reality, very different. The ranks of really effective CEOs are actually filled with introverts. People like Charles Schwab, Bill Gates, Brenda Barnes at Sara Lee.
And didn't Peter Drucker, the management guru, say something about charisma?
He did. He said the most effective leaders he knew didn't necessarily have charisma. What they had was substance. And then there's Jim Collins's famous book, Good to Great. He identified these level 5 leaders.
Right, the ones who took companies from good to great.
And what defined them. Not flash or charisma, but extreme humility coupled with intense professional will, like Darwin Smith at Kimberly-Clark. Quiet, reserved, but incredibly determined.
Humility and will, that's a powerful combination.
It really is. And there's newer research, too, by Adam Grant. He studied teams folding T-shirts, of all things. He found that when the teams were proactive, full of ideas, they actually performed better under an introverted leader.
Better. Why?
Because the introverted leaders were 20% more likely to actually listen to and implement the team's suggestions. They weren't focused on putting their own stamp on things. They let the good ideas bubble up. Their teams had 24% better results. It shows introverts can be uniquely good at leading initiative takers.
That completely flips the script on leadership.
Wow. It really does. And it extends to other areas like finance. Remember the story of Alan?
The guy who lost a fortune in the stock market.
Yeah, classic case of what the source calls reward sensitivity run amok. Getting caught up in the excitement, the deal fever, the winner's curse. Extroverts tend to have a stronger dopamine response to rewards. Introverts, though, their reward system is generally less responsive. They're less driven by those superficial prizes like money and status.
So they're less likely to get swept up in market hype.
Potentially, yes. It gives them this incalculable power to go their own way. Like the investor Seth Klarman mentioned in the material. Consistently beat the market by being cautious, avoiding risk, deliberately insulating himself from mass opinion and peer pressure. It's that quiet, independent thinking again.
Okay, this is fascinating. But is this extrovert ideal a purely Western thing? You mentioned earlier it might be less prevalent elsewhere.
That's a great question, and the material suggests, yes, it's not universal. While Americans are often described as some of the most extroverted, the picture looks different in, say, Asia. There's compelling cross-cultural research. One study compared kids in Shanghai and Ontario, Canada. In Canada, shy kids were often shunned by peers. But in Shanghai, they were actually sought-after playmates and considered for leadership roles.
Really? Sought after.
Yes. They're often described with a term of praise, dongxi, which means understanding or sensible. Chinese students tend to value friends who are humble, hardworking. American students often prioritize cheerful, sociable.
So different cultural values around quietness.
Deeply ingrained. Traditional Asian attitudes often value quietness, introspection, seeing it as a sign of deep thought. Words can even be seen as potentially dangerous if not used carefully. Preston Nee, who studies Asian business, calls this soft power. Leading by water rather than by fire, subtle, determined, achieving things through conviction rather than dynamism.
Like Craigslist or Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Quiet origins, huge impact.
Exactly those kinds of examples. It shows there are other powerful ways to lead and make change.
Okay, so wrapping all this together, what does it mean for us, navigating our own lives, whether we see ourselves as introverts, extroverts, or somewhere in the middle?
Well, the material introduces a really useful idea from Professor Brian Little, free trait theory.
Free trait theory.
Yeah, the basic idea is While our core personality traits are pretty stable, our temperaments, we can choose to act out of character. But we usually do it for things that really matter to us, what Little calls our core personal projects.
So it's like, to thine own self be true, as Shakespeare said. But sometimes you stretch for a good reason.
Exactly. Little suggests if you're acting differently in the service of love or a professional calling, maybe giving a presentation, even if you hate public speaking, you are being true to yourself because you're being true to your values or goals.
Okay, that makes sense. But how convincing are we when we act out of character? Can people tell?
Interesting question. Research by Richard Lippo looked at this. He had introverts and extroverts pretend to be the opposite while teaching a math class. Surprisingly, the pseudo-extroverts, the introverts acting extroverted, were often rated as very convincing. So most of us can stretch to some degree.
But there's a catch.
There is. It's called behavioral leakage. Our true selves can kind of seep out through unconscious body language, tone of voice, and there are people called high self monitors who are really good at managing their presentation. The source mentions Edgar, an introvert who actually enjoys hosting parties.
An introvert hosting parties. How does that work?
His strategy is that hosting puts you at the center of things without actually being a social person. You're busy managing, facilitating, and apparently over time he got so used to the role that telling anecdotes even started feeling natural to him. So adaptation is possible.
You can't do it all the time, right? It must be draining.
Exactly. You can't or shouldn't act out of character too much or for too long without paying a price. Which brings us to another key concept from Professor Little: restorative niches.
Restorative niches, like little breaks.
Precisely. It's the place you go, or the time you take, to return to your true self, to recharge after stretching. It could be a literal quiet room after a noisy meeting, or just scheduling downtime between social events. It's about proactively managing your energy, respecting your own needs.
That seems crucial, especially maybe in relationships between introverts and extroverts.
Oh, definitely. That's a classic dynamic the source highlights. The introvert might be desperately craving downtime, while the extrovert is longing for company. Social overstimulation for an introvert can feel as bad as sleep deprivation. It's a real physiological need for quiet.
And if you don't understand that difference,
It can lead to conflict. The example given is Emily, introvert, and Greg, extrovert. The is realizing that the need for connection, respect me, pay attention, love me, can be expressed very differently. You have to try and take tone out of the equation sometimes.
like that sales expert, John Berghoff,
Yeah.
he wins clients because they feel understood.
Exactly. He focuses on genuine questions, deep listening. It's not about being the loudest voice. It's about creating connection through understanding.
This also has huge implications for parenting, doesn't it?
Huge. The story of Joyce and her daughter Isabel is so relatable. Joyce worried because Isabel wanted to be alone after school.
Yeah, a lot of parents might worry about that.
But once Joyce understood Isabel was an introvert, she realized Isabel just needed that break after school to decompress from all the stimulation. And Isabel's own insight was brilliant. I like having thoughtful conversations because they make people happy. She valued depth over constant chatter.
So the advice for parents isn't to fix introversion.
Definitely not. A key piece of advice is not to label a child as shy, because they might internalize that label, see their nervousness as fixed. Instead, use empathy. Gently encourage them to take small steps towards facing social fears, but always with support, never shame.
And for schools.
Same principle.
Yeah.
Don't treat introversion as something to be cured. Celebrate these kids for who they are. Recognize they might have a different learning style. Help them find comfortable roles in groups. Maybe they're the note taker, the observer, the artist documenting things. Value their unique contributions.
Okay, so if we boil it all down, what's the takeaway message for listeners?
I think fundamentally it's about honoring your own nature. If you like slow and steady, don't feel pressured to race. If you value depth, don't force breadth. If single tasking works for you, stick with it.
And practically.
Some great advice in there, like focus on quality over quantity in networking. One new, honest-to-goodness relationship is worth 10 fistfuls of business cards. Definitely carve out those restorative niches. And in relationships, try to respect your partner's needs for socializing and your own need for solitude, or vice versa. Find that balance. And for businesses, there's a real call to action here too, isn't there?
Seems like it. If you want creativity.
Maybe ask employees to think about problems alone first, before the group meeting. If you want the wisdom of the crowd, maybe collect ideas electronically to avoid group dynamics messing things up.
More one-on-one or small group interaction.
Exactly. And crucially, don't automatically mistake assertiveness or a slick presentation for a good idea. Look deeper. And remember that research about proactive teams, they might actually do better with a quieter, introverted leader who listens well.
It really feels like the message is about balance, about diversity. The world needs both.
Absolutely. Introverts and extroverts. Quiet and talkative, careful and audacious. Each style brings its own strengths, its own kind of mighty civilization, as the source puts it.
Get this idea of personality being somewhat fixed? It's not meant to box us in.
Not at all. It's more about understanding your starting point,
Yeah.
your natural inclinations, so you can leverage them and know when and how to stretch effectively. Think of Eleanor Roosevelt, apparently quite shy, terrified of public speaking initially,
What? Know that.
but her deep social conscience drove her. She stretched, grew into public life, and had a profound impact. We can all do that, stretch ourselves for what matters.
So a final thought for everyone listening. As you go through your week, maybe think about this. Where is your sweet spot for stimulation? And what about the people around you? How might understanding that change how you approach your work, your relationships, even just where you choose to spend your time?
Yeah, what stands out most to you from this deep dive? And how can you use that insight to help create spaces at home, at work, in your community where all kinds of temperaments can genuinely flourish?